The bright spot shrank again. The last thing he recalled was being alone in his bedroom. There was a fancy bed in the room. A man stood by the window. The hero gazed at the city from above and then lay under the blanket. When he lay down on the bed, his body felt impossibly heavy. Did he think he was poisoned? Murdered? Gray told himself to think. There was a knife in a sheath nearby. Many people wanted him dead. In the display case, there was a sword and a crown. After all, he was a king. But no matter how much he wished to find the cause of his death, there was nothing he could do about it. He could only accept it. He hoped that at the end, he would not be met by a group of babies with wings. The light was nearing. It was getting brighter. Words of joy were heard for a man and a woman that they had a healthy baby boy. A fuzzy outline of a person appeared. The hero thought that he had just been born. A blurry shape of a man and a woman appeared, who asked her husband to help her a bit. She wanted to look at him. The former king thought, does this mean that the light at the end of the tunnel is the light passing through women? No, there is no need to think about it. The mother said that he is lovely. The father said that he has her hair. The parents looked at the baby with a grin. The hero thought that wherever he was, he understood their language. This is a good sign. This soft, bright smile that shows motherly love, he could not help but think about how beautiful and charming she is. The woman turned to her husband and said that he has his eyes. The baby thought he was sure that a man with such a strong jaw and eyebrows sharp as a blade would be strict and serious. However, the father, waving his hand with a grin, greeted the baby, saying that he was his daddy and asked him to say, "Daddy." Ray laughed oddly when his wife told him that he had just been born. The newborn decided that it did not matter. There were pieces of armor hanging on the wall. The baby decided that his surroundings seemed normal enough. He looked at the candle fixed in the corner and then gazed at the pieces of armor. The blue eyes looked shocked. He thought, what? Alice was holding the baby in her arms. The boy wondered where he was. In the clearing stood a house with a straw roof. It had white walls. The weeks passed slowly. Ray hugged his wife, who was holding the baby. Despite her kindness and gentleness, his mother Alice held the reins of her family firmly. Aside from the occasional silly antics, his father Ray was a reliable and likable man. While he was thankful to have been born into a loving family, his life had been filled with struggles that he wouldn't wish on his foes. The baby stretched out his arms and legs, with little control of his limbs. A green mist came from the diaper, and the inability to control some of the body's functions that came with being in a prison of flesh. The mother changed the baby's diaper. The child blushed. Perhaps the mental strength built during his time as a king and leader of his country, as well as the faint hope that this was a dream, were the only things that kept him sane. A woman and a baby walked through a busy market. It seemed as if the hero had traveled back in time to a much older era. The child looked at the man's huge sword and wondered when it had become so common for people in the past to carry weapons. The shopkeeper yelled that the potions were great for energy, only 2 coppers. The former king had come up with the idea that these bottles of odd-looking liquids that they passed off as medicine were being sold legally. Alice turned to the baby sitting behind her and asked if he must be tired. The baby had an unhappy look on his face. He heard, "How about going home?" And the customer shouted that she would take 3 potions for her husband. The baby was lying thoughtfully on the pillow, thinking that knowledge is power. He had studied his surroundings for the past weeks. The father looked at the child, who thought he was sure he knew what to expect from this world. Ray picked up the child in his arms and said, "Daddy is home. How is his baby?" He tossed the baby into the air, startling the mother, who screamed at him, "What will you do if he falls?" The baby seemed to be queasy, as expected from such a weak body. The father laughed as he held him in his arms. To think he had been weakened by a simple toss. Ray held his son outstretched and said his father had done that when he was younger. He told his wife he thought their baby was having fun. The baby was purple. He screamed at the sudden movement. Laughing, Ray spun him around. Alice called out to her husband. The baby was queasy again. He hit his foot on the wall. The father looked at him in fear, and his wife came up from behind with a fake grin. The baby screamed in tears while Ray sat in the corner with bumps on his head. Alice comforted her crying son, telling him he was okay. She brought her glowing palm to his knee and asked him to let his mother fix him. A bright glow appeared. The baby looked at his mother's palms. The scrape on his knee was healed. Alice picked the baby up in her arms and said that it was much better this way. The baby looked at her, thinking that he had jumped to conclusions. It seemed that he knew nothing about this world. In his previous life, he had been a king. The hero stood on the wall and looked down. He had led armies, sitting on a mechanical horse. He had raised his sword with robots and defeated leaders of countries from all over the world. In front of the king on the ground lay a man. But despite all his successes, he had never been so proud of himself as he was now. The child grinned a little. He looked forward with resolve and thought that now he could crawl. The parents watched him crawl forward. Alice told her husband to make sure that he did not hit his head on this corner. Ray replied that it was good. She should not let him near the shelf. The child hit his forehead on the mirror and sat down next to it, looking at himself. The parents exclaimed fondly that Arthur was looking at himself in the mirror. Several months had passed, but he still had not gotten used to his new name. Arthur was too cute a name for a former king. The little boy put his hands up to the mirror. Although looking at himself now, he had to admit that he was totally adorable. Arthur grinned. He looked at his reflection with resolve and thought that future ladies should be careful. They should prepare to have their hearts broken. The parents laughed, watching the boy look in the mirror. Alice kissed her son on the cheek. He was lying in bed, and his mother wished him sweet dreams. When she left, the little boy opened his eyes. He raised his hands in the air, deciding that the mission had begun. He removed the blanket and tossed it on the floor. Arthur carefully climbed out of bed, swung his leg over the railing, and dropped down on the blanket with a determined look. The child thought that now that Alice thought he was asleep, he had about an hour before she came back to check on him. He crawled forward. The hero turned around, looking at the woman washing the dishes. He crawled diligently, thinking that the goal was within reach.
Full speed ahead!
The kid crawled toward the open door. He looked into the room. There were many books in the study. The kid clenched his fist, thinking that this was a success. He sat on the floor with a pleased look, then looked at the books on the shelves. There were many volumes on the rack. Ever since he found this place, he had been sneaking here every night to learn more about this world. Arthur presented a map with several kingdoms. The continent of Devon, where he was born, was divided into 3 main kingdoms. In the forest, there was a horned beast. This was Lenoir, the elven kingdom, hidden deep in the forest. In another kingdom, there were small stone houses. This was Dar, a huge underground kingdom, also the homeland of the dwarves. Among the houses, there was a huge castle. This was Sapin, the kingdom of humans, surely the most crowded region. The kid pulled one of the books toward himself. Like his previous world, there was also a monarchy system, only the throne was passed on by family, not based on merit. Pulling out the book, the boy fell on his back. He learned that this world was much less advanced than the one he lived in before. Arthur held the book with his arms outstretched, but he realized that the reason for the lack of progress was there was a lit candle on the table. The kid thought that this was it. On the table lay a book, a guide for beginner, gifted magicians. Magic. Arthur focused on flipping through the book, looking ahead. He thought that he had stopped there. There were symbols and drawings in the book. In his old world, there was a life force called Kai, which, after tough training, users could use to strengthen their bodies and weapons. Light appeared. In this world, there was a similar force called mana, but unlike Kai, which only existed within a person, mana was everywhere. The child was reading a book as he lay on the floor. He pictured outlines of people, thinking that the ability to control mana was mostly genetic, with about 1 in 100 children having it. Arthur scratched his butt, cursing the rash. He pictured outlines, reading that the 2 most common ways were strengthening and casting spells. Lines led to the outline. Enhancers strengthen their bodies with mana, allowing them to gain amazing strength, defense, and agility. However, their weakness was their short attack range. Arrows led from the outline. Spellcasters, on the other hand, project mana into the outside world, allowing them to shape the environment to their will. However, they needed to fill their own mana core with mana from the outside world to cast a spell. The cloaked man reached out to the crouching figures. His mother was what was called a deviant, or more accurately, an emitter. He recalled her treating his knee. They are a rare type of mage who can use unique healing mana. The child crossed his arms. According to this book, the first awakening of mages occurs between early and late youth. Arthur touched his chin as their manor showed itself. The manor sounded very similar to the Kai Center from his past life, and to form a Kai Center, children were taught to meditate and sense the bits scattered inside the body, and then gather them together in one place. He looked at his hands, sitting in a meditative pose. He thought this was interesting. The child's eyes were closed. A light shone inside. He thought happily that it was working. Suddenly, his mother grabbed him. Alice held her son with a grin, saying that here he is, making her worry. Suddenly, she noticed something. The woman held the baby and asked if he couldn't go to the toilet. Arthur thought that he was about to start his journey as the greatest mage in the world. He shouldn't be forced to be a constipated baby. Green smoke came out of the diaper. Alice laughed and said that it looked like he didn't have such problems. It was time to change his diaper. The baby blushed, thinking that while he was focusing, he really had soiled his diaper. There were books on the bookshelf. Alice was sitting at the table. She opened a gray notebook, dipped a quill in ink, and brought it to the paper. The woman wrote that a little over 2 years had passed. However, she still felt that she was learning more and more about her child every day. She came to a conclusion. Arthur's parents were helping him take his first steps. The boy grinned that he must be the most adorable child. She held her son in her arms, with his brown hair and blue eyes that looked at her almost smartly. She knew that he would get into trouble in the future if she did not become a strict and dependable mother. It was not like she could rely on Ray. Her hands were clutching a stick. Alice turned around, noticing it. The father was teaching his son to hold the stick like a sword. Ray turned around. The wife gave off an air of danger. She continued writing that she stopped her husband when he tried to teach her child to fight. The girl's lips were pink. It was like when he could barely crawl. Alice walked down the street. There was a sign with knives up ahead. Arthur reached out his hands to her. One thing she noticed was that the child really liked to go to the small shops that stopped in Ashbur. So instead of buying groceries once or twice a week, they went to the city center every other day. Arthur reached out his hands to the shiny stones. He looked at the magician with the rings. The woman wrote that she was not going to spoil him. The magician had conjured fire. It was to have fresh food in the house and for learning purposes. She looked at her son. Looking at Arthur growing so fast, she wondered what he would be when he grew up. The pen scratched on the paper. Arthur, like his father, she had no doubt that he would be interested in becoming an explorer. The people in the room chatted. Alice wrote that she couldn't help but worry. She could only hope that he would do better than the naive young teens who hoped to grow up as explorers. The woman peeked at her son crawling. If only she could do something about his constant habit of sneaking into the study. Alice picked her son up from the floor. She wanted to move his bed into the study. She carried the child out of the room, but the next day, the girl slammed the diary shut, put the quill in the ink, and left the study. Arthur was standing by the window. He looked out the window. Ray was pulling off his glove. He tossed the gloves back. It had been about 2 years since the hero had begun his tough journey of learning. His father held his hands out in front of him. Arthur had learned a lot since then, but it was exciting to learn something new every day. He looked at his father through the window. Ray was frowning and saying something. He had been mumbling for several minutes now, and he was focusing very hard. The man stood with his hands out in front of him. The stone began to rise. It rose even higher. Ray was surrounded by power. Arthur watched, curious, wondering what he would create. The man raised his hands up, lifting the air and the stones. His son looked at it, amazed. Ray was lifting the stones into the air. He spread his legs. The man looked ahead with a frown. Then he swung his arm and sent the stones forward. Arthur watched it. His father closed his eyes and then turned and saw his son. Ray was posing, saying that his dad was awesome. The little boy looked at it gloomily, wondering, is that all? 3 minutes of intense focus to throw something that you can physically toss with less effort. A hand fell on his head. Alice asked with a grin, is he watching his father? The girl looked out the window and exclaimed that he had ruined the front yard again. Ray picked up the gloves and put them on. Alice watched him with a grin. Arthur thought that he had recently learned that his father was an amplifier. He wondered what he would be like when his manhwa awakened. The man stood in front, clenched his fists. The leaf fell, then dropped to the ground. The man looked forward resolutely. He swung his fist and did a punch, then kicked, then an elbow. The movement left a trace. Ray made a circular motion with his hand and exhaled. Arthur looked out the window. He grinned, then turned away. Suddenly, the little boy noticed something. He was standing on a bench looking down. He felt scared. His face was gloomy. The floor seemed very far away. Arthur knelt down and began to lower his legs, shaking. Ray looked at him. The boy Alice heard. His eyes half closed. His mother picked him up, kissing him, and said that it looked like someone needed a nap. The boy looked at the study. He held out his hand and told his mother about the books. She answered with a grin that not now, it was time to sleep. She promised that maybe later. Arthur thought unhappily that he had no choice. He pushed away with his hands with a bright look. He sadly asked his mother for the books. The woman closed her eyes from his glow. Her eye was closed, stretching out her arms. She carried her son. She frowned and then growled, finally agreed that he could play in the study for a while. Alice turned away, thinking that she was a bad mother. Boys his age played all the time. They should make a nursery for him. Arthur walked into the study and thought that this was not shameful. A great warrior should use all the tools in his arsenal. The boy sat on the floor with a book. Alice watched him with a grin. Suddenly, she heard a crash. She left the study, saying that father had better not cut down another tree. She would be back soon. Arthur turned his gaze to her. His greatest success, besides the gathered knowledge of this world, he sat in a meditation pose. This is his progress, the formation of a manhwa. The little boy sat in front of an open book. He spent the last 2 years moving tens of thousands of tiny bits of mana. There was light in his chest, gathering them together near his solar plexus. The boy's eyes were closed. He understood why natural formation had to last until youth. His lips were pressed together, seeing how slowly these bits were drawn to the center of his body. There was a blue sky above the building. Arthur's eyes were closed. He thought that this was a hard task for his body and mind. He meditated next to the book. From effort, he stuck out his tongue and thought that these 2 years were not wasted. The glow became brighter. Arthur thought he was almost done. Ray held a broken tree. Alice held out a glass to him with a grin. Birds were flying in the sky. The kid thought that there was one last piece left. Parts of the manna were glowing. Suddenly, a loud explosion was heard behind the woman. Ray pulled her toward himself, saving her from the fire. He held the woman with his hand and covered her with his back from the shock wave. He closed his eyes from the fire. The stream of flame was getting stronger. Ray ran up to Alice and grabbed her hand. He jumped aside with her. An explosion thundered behind them. Everything around was covered in flames. The fire caught them. The guy hugged the girl. He tried to calm her down. Then they turned back. The brown-haired man asked if his wife was okay. Then she looked at the house in horror. She tried to break free from her husband's hands and screamed that Arthur was still there. The guy was horrified. He clenched his teeth, and then he ran into this ruin, pushing aside the obstacles. The man tried to get inside. He climbed into the house. Then his eyes widened. He looked ahead in surprise. The man fell to his knees. Even his lips were shaking. Tears flowed from his eyes. He looked up. Then his wife came up to him. She asked what happened, and he looked ahead in shock and said that it was some kind of joke. The girl was also surprised. She said that he wasn't even 3. The baby was floating in the air. His parents hugged each other and watched this. The child landed on the ground. He put his hands behind his back, grinned. He felt great. The boy clenched his fist, thought about how cool it was to have a manhwa. He spread his arms to the side, noting that even the trees were longer. The baby raised his shoulders, grinned at the question about the trees. There was ruin all around. The child stood right in the middle of the destroyed house. He did not understand what was happening. He asked his parents if the house was attacked and who dared to wreck the king's house. The baby is lying on the bed. In addition to the rebuilding of their house, a lot has happened in the past year. The baby was reading a book together with his mother. He learned to read and write. Mom showed him different books. He studied new control and mana growth. His father showed him some kind of plan. He was unhappy since his body was too small to do sparring with his father. He studied the basics of body training, and they did not run together. It was not easy for the child. His father taught him to pump up the abs. He also taught him to do push-ups. Not long ago, he finally decided that he would train for practice, and now he has his own wooden sword, which was needed for this practice. His father gave it to him for his 3rd birthday. Then the baby was distracted from the book. His father entered the room very loudly and happily, saying that it was time for training, and he brought his sword. The papers flew to the side. They stood in the street opposite each other. The father said that now he needed to recall what he had taught him. The man raised the stick up, adding that to mix the flow of mana with his breath, just like his heart or lungs, his core, it was just another organ. The child looked at all this in confusion. He wondered if most 4-year-olds would understand these vague instructions. The child was preparing to attack. He looked at his father angrily and then he attacked. He struck his sword at the stick. He attacked his father, but his father blocked his blows with a grin each time. The father laughed, saying that he believed in his son, he would surely cope. The boy was furious. He thought about how his father would not let him rest until he did this. He had a little time to make it in time for dinner. The boy thought, gathered energy. He opened his eyes suddenly and looked forward. His father looked at him in confusion. He grinned. The boy swung and then he hit the stick hard, breaking it. The father was shocked. It spun and flew to the side. When it fell to the ground, the father looked at it. He surely did not expect this. The child squatted down, asking if he could now go to the office, to which the father gave his consent. In the office, Arthur was sitting on the bed, in the lotus position. He pictured a person who gathers energy in his heart. In this world, strength is measured by the color of your core. The manhwa is formed black due to the mixing of blood and other impurities with mana bits that form the manhwa. He pictured a slightly different core. It becomes pure as the impurities are filtered out over time. The stages are as follows: black core, red core, orange core, yellow core, silver core, and a white core. Imagine a white bucket. He thought that each stage is divided into 3 shades: dark, solid, and light. The man with the white core spread his arms to the side. The lighter the core, the cleaner and the more energy it has. Here, the child was distracted by a loud cry. He was clearly unhappy about it. The boy frowned. He was called to dinner. There was a plate of food and a glass of water on the table. Mom was eating happily. Dad was doing the same. Well, The boy was upset, stabbing the meat with the fork, thinking that he wanted to be alone. How could he study if there was always someone nearby? He put his head on his hand. The boy very strongly and clearly jingled his fork and knife. The man offered to give the child a real teacher. The girl stood up, pointing her staff at her husband. She screamed that their son was only 4 years old. An army of carrots stood in front of her, which fired their arrows at him. Mother looked at him angrily, screaming. In addition, he said that he could teach him. The arrows flew with the father. He was in armor with an army of vegetables ready to attack, noting that this is it. The young man crossed his arms in armor. He never thought that their son would be such a genius of mana control at 4 years old. He is only holding him back since his son has great potential. Then an explosion thundered. The mother sent energy forward, and her carrots began to attack. Everything happened at the table. The parents were arguing. The mother said that she would not allow her child to leave home for some city hundreds of miles away, and the father replied that this is not just any city, and he will make sure that his friend takes care of the child. The child sat silently, continued to eat. The parents were still arguing, and then one of them hit the table. Both hung over the child. They looked at him firmly. The father said that he himself should decide whether he wants to go to a big city and have a real teacher. The boy, with crumbs in his mouth, squinted. He did not understand why his parents let him decide on his own because it was too serious a choice for a 4-year-old. He swallowed loudly. He put down his fork and spoon, looked at his parents, and added that the parents needed to go together and meet with the teacher. The father looked at his mother with satisfaction. She looked at him with surprise. The child was scared, thinking that he said something wrong, or maybe his idea was too hard. The girl put her hand to her chin. The parents laughed. The boy said that they really did not think about going together. The mother leaned on her hand. She said that she could feel better if she was there when he would check and meet his teacher. The brown-haired man hit the table so hard that the plate flew up and said that now they would all go to the city of Cyrus together. The kid was shocked to hear how his parents were already preparing for a 3-week trip. At night home, the child was studying the book. It seemed to him that he had seen it somewhere. He studied each page very carefully. Then his mother came up to him. She picked up the book and said that it was time to go to bed since they were leaving tomorrow. The boy began to go to bed. He did not understand why so quickly. The girl covered him with a blanket, adding that she also hated to rush. When Arthur was already lying under the blanket, he looked at his mother. She told him that their old friends would also send them to this city. They would take them because his father had once been with them. She kissed him on the forehead, leaving the room. The girl added that if she did not catch her son reading again, then he could take a few books with him on the road. The room darkened. The baby agreed and wished his mother good night, hearing the same in response. He knew that the Horns twins had been in this area for some time. They even helped rebuild their house when they had time. The boy looked at the ceiling and raised his hand. From what he heard, the group consisted of 2 mages with 3 amplifiers. They will help with any problems they may face, and he will finally leave this small quiet town. The boy also thought it was time to see what this world really has to offer. Morning, forest, the family was heading forward. In front of them was a wonderful long road, and someone in the distance was waving. Then a young man with red hair approached them. He hugged his father, and the latter said to him, "Thanks again for taking us with you on this trip." The brown-haired man moved his hand to the side and added, "Fellas, I want you all to meet my son." He pointed his finger at the child and added, "Arthur, introduce yourself." The boy bowed and said, "Hello, my name is Arthur Leon." The guy patted his head, saying, "Such manners." His red hair fluttered in the wind. The dagger seemed very scary. The man knelt down. He was still ruffling the baby's head and asked, "Are you sure Ray is your dad, kid?" It was Adam, Crunch, Augmenter, Specialty Spear. Then someone suddenly grabbed the child by the arms. It was a beautiful blonde who came to him and said, "Hay's just too precious. Be thankful you look more like your mom." Her name was Angela Rose, Conjurer, Specialty Wind Magic. The baby was at her pressing chest and thought, "What's going on? Can't breathe." But someone took him by the scruff of the neck and lifted him up, saying, "Angela, you're hurting him." The guy was lifted up. He was scared. It was a huge man. He looked at him so kindly. It was Duran, a magician, Specialty Earth Magic. He carefully put the baby on the ground, then he patted him on the shoulder. The big kind uncle looked like a nice dog. He raised his finger up and grinned at the boy. The child sharply looked away. In the distance, she sat in the lock, a brunette with sad eyes. It was Jasmine, a magician, Specialty Double Daggers. She lowered her head and silently went to the cart. A girl came up to the boy and said not to pay attention to her, she just needed to get used to all of them. She extended her hand, and another beautiful brunette with a bow bowed to the boy, and said that she was pleased to meet him. Her name was Shard, a magician, specialty magic bow. The boy's father came up to the cart, clapped their hands, and said, "All right, now that everyone's gotten acquainted, let's prepare to move on." They loaded everything into the cart. It was hard, but the preparations were complete. The guys asked if everyone was ready, and inside sat a blonde mother and baby. They answered that they were fine, and the two carts went forward, harnessed by fast, huge lizards. The young man looked into the distance. They passed very beautiful places. The journey begins. The guy stood with a bowl on his head. It was getting dark in the night. The guys fought monsters. Alice was cooking something on the fire. Ray and Jasmine came up to her. They were dragging huge wolves. Everyone was sitting by the fire. The kid propped his head up with his hand. A brunette came up to him and asked how he was, if he was tired. He looked at her, started waving his arms, and answered that he was tired. The girl told him not to worry because this was his first trip in this life. She sat down next to him and added that his father bragged almost the entire way that he was a genius magician. Then she asked if he really woke up a year ago. Adam was watching their talk. At that moment, he got up, shook himself off, and said that he needed to stretch a little before going to bed and reminded that his father was not against training with his son. Then he asked if he could play with him now. The boy frowned. He thought that the uncle was stretching on his own. The baby's father looked at the boy and answered positively, but asked to be careful since they barely moved from light force and mana exercise. At that moment, the man grabbed the boy by the scruff of the neck and lifted him up. The parents looked at each other, watching their son being carried away. Normal children his age, she and too would be able to climb the stairs well. Here, no one thinks that fighting with him is unusual. The opponents stood opposite each other. The man gritted his teeth and grinned. He asked if the boy was ready. He began to wave his sword. The red-haired one also stood in a stance and asked if he knew how to strengthen his weapon. At that moment, a huge tiger appeared behind the man. The child looked away and in fear. Everyone else was watching them. At that moment, the boy looked at his father and silently told him that the red-haired one was eager for blood. He needed to be pulled out of this mess. But at that moment, the father raised his fist, grinned, and sent him a mental message to make it quick. The boy lowered his head and thought that his father was useless. He closed his eyes, then he opened them sharply. He woke up his inner beast. The king appeared behind him. He squeezed his sword tightly. He began to gather all his energy inside. After that, he jumped forward and ran at the man. At that moment, he was just grinning. He took a stance and was ready to strike. He frowned, and he blocked it. At the moment when the little one ran up to him, the sword flew very close. The guy did some tricks with his blade. The boy flew to the side. He did not understand what it was. Then the kid pushed off the ground again. He ran at the man and thought, "Damn, this is a baby body." Adam turned around in surprise. He grinned again. The boy's sword glowed. He swung and attacked again. The man attacked back, but the boy jumped. He flew into him with all his weight and threw the man to the side. He did not understand what was happening. In flight, the boy swung again. He looked him straight in the eyes. The redhead tried to kick him, but he dodged. He landed and looked at the man with scared eyes, and the man was quickly approaching him. He was waving his stick, and in a second he struck. At that moment, Newton's third law of motion came to mind. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. The guy pushed the boy. He dropped his sword and flew to the side. He hit the ground very hard. Mom got scared and screamed. The man did the opposite reaction. The poor kid was lying on the ground. It hurt. He got up. His elbows were bruised. Then Duran came up to the man. He gave him a good slap on the back of the head and said that he hit the boy too hard. The guy grabbed the back of his head and asked who taught him to fight like that. Through what tough training he created this little monster. Dad smirked, looked away, and replied that he did not teach him this. The mother leaned over her son and she was treating him and asked, "Did his father teach him this?" The boy raised his hands and answered that he learned it by watching his dad and reading some books. Everyone looked at him in confusion. Books? No matter what else he was going to do, they asked to teach them those skills of his movements. The little head grinned and said, "So you just have to cross your back leg over your lead leg, and then kick off with mana while you let your body almost fall. Then you have toe." He watched as the brunette fell. The redhead flew into the tree, and he added, "Almost." Three kind of a loud sound. The man flew into the tree. The baby was taken aback. He walked up to him. The guy's head was inside the trunk. He showed a thumbs up. A few days had passed since they began their journey to the city of Cyrus. Waterfall. Alice watched the baby. In the background, the guys were jumping into the water from the cliff. During this time, his birthday had passed. The boy looked away. Jasmine still held the dagger in her hands and said that it was a birthday gift for him, a lesson. The redhead emerged and waved his hair. Everyone looked at him and grinned. They continued their practice with good progress until now. Adam looked at them, then Duran was pushed off the cliff. He dropped into the water. Splashes were everywhere. The child thought that the brunette somehow managed to master several skills by now. On the shore, the young men were messing around, poking each other. Amr continued to think that it was confusing to him how the girl could grasp his directions so quickly, especially when learning a light step. Everyone hurried somewhere. The sun was glowing. The blonde was curing the brunette. Mom turned to the child and told him to prepare faster because they were departing now. He was packing something in his bag, grinned and said that he needed to rush now. They departed. They were crossing some odd gorge. The foot of some creature stepped on the ground at that time. Under the bright sky, they were talking about how he still recalls how his father gets them into all sorts of problems. The reedhead approached the baby and grinned. Everyone chuckled. The brunette added that she was certain that the redhead wasn't the only one causing problems, because there was a time when they mistakenly went to the girl. She glanced at the guy. He cut her off and said that it didn't occur. It was just a tiny rodent. The girl was sad. Her son walked up and asked if Thana was okay, but she just grinned and replied that she was just a bit weary and that she was fine. The baby placed his hand on her shoulder. He was clutching a book in his hand, then he continued reading. He held on with all his strength, but something was clearly troubling him. He stiffened and looked away. The girl's eyes gazed at him with fear. She peeked out of the crack, startling the guy, asking him to show her more. The baby stared ahead. He dropped his eyes to the book, then everything trembled. He was very frightened. The girl turned around. She asked what happened. The brunette yelled that they were robbers. We must get ready for an attack. The blonde stretched her dagger forward and commanded the wind to follow her to collect and shield. A strong breeze blew. The mother covered her son. Arrows soared. It was a shockwave. They flew straight at the cart, which at that moment was guarded by the wind and kept soaring to the side. The young man glanced to the side and thought he saw the brunette, who was already in a position. His father also prepared for fight, and Darren grabbed his stick. Adam was also set. He took a step forward. There was an arrow in his leg. Jasmine yanked it out as if she felt nothing. She leaped back and did a flip, landed on her knees, and took aim. The mother and son were sitting inside, scared. There were a bunch of strange creatures around them. The boy thought that they were surrounded. They were odd guys with bows, and others were peeking slightly out from under the grass. Then he saw an axe, a chest covered in marks. The man stuck his axe into the ground, and his nasty grin covered half his face. He said that it was a great catch. An unpleasant man with big lips stared at them and added that they should leave only the women and the child alive and try not to leave marks. He added that damaged goods would be worth less. The child thought that he had been in the bubble for too long. At that moment, the awful man watched them with his followers with mockery, and the child kept thinking that he had almost forgotten that every world has its share of filth like him. He tightened his lips and looked up, thinking what his damaged goods. Arthur grabbed his small sword. He was very serious. Alice stared at him with fear. She hugged the child, hiding him under herself. The girl was very frightened. She told the child not to worry because she was with him. At first he was shocked, but then he calmed. The archery started. The arrows soared straight to the cart. The men rushed to guard them, directed each other to defend and shield. They began to block the arrows. One of them built an earthen wall, but the arrows kept soaring, and they were heading straight for the mother and child. For a second, the blonde had been fending them off with air. The robbers were mad. The brunette began to strike them from the wall, but they skillfully blocked her arrows. At that moment, Ray leaped from the cliff straight at the thief. He soared at him despite the arrows. He landed so that stones soared to the sides. He crushed one of them, and then he turned to the rest like a bullet. He began to take out one after another. A moment later, smashing one, holding another by the head, a robber with a sword hung over him, but an arrow was already soaring at him, which killed him in literally a second. The young man turned and thanked the rescuer. The brunette nodded back. The fight continued. The girl killed the robbers one after another, but the guy did not fall behind her, doing the same. The reedhead stared forward angrily. He even took out the thug. Dust soared from under his feet. He pointed his blade forward and stabbed the awful robber on it. It was clear that he was a bit weary, but at that moment, the brunette took out several at once. She mercilessly killed one after another. Her eyes were burning with anger. One robber with a bunch of rings had a whip. He struck with it, but the girl managed to leap back. Instead, he killed his comrades, and the girl landed on the ground as if nothing had happened. He approached her again and told the girl to stop fighting. He would make sure to train her well, that in the end, she would beg to stay with him. She glanced at him briefly, after which he struck again, but she leaped back amazingly quickly again. It was clear that he hit her face and her hand. The girl stood opposite her opponent, and the child thought about how she was at a disadvantage against him and how he could aid her. He thought and placed his hand on the card. Would he be able to fight an adult with this body? At that moment, something huge soared into the chariot, smashing it into pieces. It was the boy's father. He was worn out, looked up, blood was flowing from his mouth. The mother and son were very frightened for him. Then the little boy turned to the side. He saw that it was that same scary man who did this to his father. He shouted that his mother should cure his father faster, but at that moment, his mother looked at him in tears. Something was wrong with her, and she said that she could not. The boy wondered why his mother did not cure his father. At that moment, while his mother was curing him, his father looked at her with a grin and said that he was fine. His wound was not deadly, she should not worry and do everything possible. The boy looked to the side in fear. His father called him. He frowned as he told his son that once his mother cast the healing spell, those bad men would come after her. He could fight off the leader, but he would have no time to worry about guarding them, so he would take his mother back along the path they came from and not stop. The boy got scared and shouted that he was not going to leave him. He was going to battle because everyone knew how strong he was. The man grinned. He patted the boy on the head, leaning against him. He said that he knew he could battle. That was why he trusted him to guard his mother. Blood was pouring out of his mouth. Dad added that it was not only the mother that needed to be guarded, but the baby inside her as well. Then the boy recalled Dad holding his mother's stomach. He recalled how his mother had not felt well on the road, saying she was just weary. He realized that his mother was pregnant. Dad placed his hand on his head. He leaned over and said that he was going to tell him when they got to town. The child grabbed his dad by the hand. He looked up and promised to guard his mom. At that moment, he turned to the side while his mom was curing his dad. He told him to get ready. Dad frowned and said that there were 4 mages on their side. The leader of the robbers got mad. He pointed his finger at them and shouted that they had a healer and they couldn't let her get away. The child rushed to the side, grabbed his mom by the hand, and said that they had to flee. Despite the fact that she was trying to stop him, he looked sternly to the side and thought about how his dad wouldn't die. The red-haired one waved his hand and shouted for them to flee after him. He clenched his teeth. The robber rushed out too, but the man was able to stop him. They clashed in fight. He promised to hold him off while they fled. The mother and son vanished into the distance. One of the archers took aim at them. The boy felt it. He turned around. An arrow was already soaring at them, but the child blocked it with his sword. He was furious. The sword cracked and then it broke into 2 pieces, but stopped the arrow. The robber did not understand how it happened, but at that very second, he was killed. The brunette looked to the side and shouted for the child not to stop. They fled with their mother as fast as they could. The boy felt that something was wrong, imagining those awful people. He thought that there must be 4 magicians there. The fight continued. He began to count the enemies. 1, the redhead was battling. The 2nd, his father was battling. The 3rd, but he could not find the 4th. Here their leader was almost beaten. He ordered to forget about the plan and kill them, but the child did not understand who he was talking to. He turned to the side, and then someone appeared in the air. He was frightened. The situation was not the best. The 4th magician created a whirlpool. At that moment, he sent a gust of water straight at them. The child thought that even if he could dodge it, his mother would not have time. The boy was very mad. He was filled with anger. He abruptly stopped with his feet, mentally apologizing to his mother in advance. At that moment, the young hero pushed his mother aside. She was screaming. He let the water cover him. He knew that it might not work out, but he wanted to destroy the magician. At that very second, he threw something towards the whirlpool. The water covered him well. At that very second, a blade soared out of there, which pierced his opponent's knee, and the boy also created an invisible thread connecting him to this dagger, which he reached for. It was a string of mana. He soared up onto a cliff. His hands were trembling, his feet were scraping the ground. The child was soaring up. At that time, the magician was all over the edge of the cliff, but a second later, he let go of his hand, and the 2 of them soared to the very bottom. Diron got his bearings. He created a huge hand out of stone, and that hand shot straight down after them. The child was soaring down with tears in his eyes. He thought that everyone else would be okay. The boy was crying. He thought that he always wanted to be an older brother. A room with curtains, the boy was sitting on the bed. He went to the door. He opened it. There was a girl with a plate. He went out to his servants. They greeted him, wishing him a good morning. The young man walked along a large hallway. He entered some odd room. It was the old man's office. The man looked at him. The king was looking at a picture on the wall. This picture showed 3 people, the council who actually ran the country, managed its politics and economy. Then he looked at his picture. In a world full of issues such as declining birth rates and resource limits, wars were replaced by duels and armies of kings. He was one of them. The old man turned to him again and asked if he admired his picture. He stood up from the table, saying that while being on the council was helpful, he wouldn't lie and say that he was jealous of the fame and glory that kings had after victory. He walked up to the king and said, "Anyway, what could he owe him?" The boy grabbed something around his neck. He took off his medallion and placed it on the table. Then he left the room, saying that he was quitting. The boy placed his hand to his forehead. He had spent his entire life trying to be the strongest, and for what? Fame, glory. He was still an orphan. Everyone he held dear was gone. He recalled the fire. He would give up everything he had in this life for the chance to go back and see them again, recall that squad, how they had fun around the fire. It was getting light outside. The boy was lying on the ground, didn't understand where he was. His eyes were narrowed, didn't understand how he was still alive. There was something off to the side. The boy turned his head and looked. There lay a broken robber, covered in blood. The boy turned away. He felt sick. He vomited so much that even the birds heard it. Now he was lying not only in torn clothes in the whole garden but also all green. He squinted hard, and then a petal fell on him. He opened his eyes, brushed it aside, raised his hand up. The child tried to stand. He rolled over onto his stomach, and terrible pain reached for the berry. It was very hard for him, but he looked at it, after which he ate it eagerly and washed it down with water. He tossed the flask aside and continued to stare at the sky, after which his eyes closed again. He mentally thanked for the treat. Birds were chirping in the sky. The child opened his eyes again, tried to stand. Well, due to lack of strength, he fell again. He exhaled heavily, closed his eyes again. After that, he barely recalled what happened, and the little body was lying on the ground, and the core was black. A second later, in a leap, he finally stood. It was very painful for him, but nevertheless, he stood on his feet. Arthur looked to the side. He saw a dagger in the back. He yanked it out of the robber so hard that he fell, sitting on the ground. He looked up. The cliff he fell from was incredibly high, and he didn't understand how he survived, thinking about how much time had passed. The young man stood up and grabbed a stick. There was a huge forest around him. He thought that it didn't matter, he had to move on. Well, here we heard how someone was glad that he woke up. The child was shocked. The boy turned around and was ready to strike. He was in shock. He hid behind a tree and, looking at the lifeless body of the robber, he thought that it was him. Then, out of nowhere, the question of how his body was doing was repeated. The boy looked away and thought about what if the robber gets up. He pounced on him with a stick, but the voice said not to worry, the corpse will not come to life. If he is scared of it, the boy exhaled, but then thought that the voice was still coming from somewhere. He listened, did not trust this unknown voice, no matter how smooth and noble it sounded. The boy put forward his knife and asked who it was. Was it the one who rescued him? At that moment, a bunny hopped out of the bush. The boy looked at the sky, and the voice said that he would find out everything as soon as his home arrived. The boy was not puzzled. He said that this someone was speaking quite confidently, thinking that he was trying to find him, and the voice answered that he was the only one who could return him home from this place. The boy got frightened, thought that yes, he needed to go home. He recalled his parents, his beautiful mother, his relatives. He thought, if everything was okay with them, if they got to the city. The child put the knife away and boldly walked forward. He coughed, became shy, and asked the voice if he could ask him a question and if he could honor him with his presence. The voice laughed so loudly that the birds flew away. The boy looked up, and the voice told him that he was catching on quickly, although it was a bit rude to call a lady mister, but his feeling was there, so yes. The boy was shocked. He thought, how did the voice know his name? At that moment, his eyes lit up. The voice answered that it would show him. The boy grabbed his head and squatted down. He could hardly see anything around him, and the huge forest began to move. The rocks began to shift. He looked down with wild eyes. The voice said that they suggested leaving immediately. It would be much safer while it was still light. They measured how the condition of his body gradually got better, leaving him with only a few herbs here and there during the day. He couldn't help but think. He walked on, Goody, on a huge tree and thought, what kind of magic did she use to rescue him from falling? How could she know that they were falling, and why did she rescue only him? The question of the four men through the branches. The child continued to think. The more he tried to find an answer, the more questions he had. Here, his ears began to twitch. Some sound surrounded him. The sound was getting closer. The young man dug around the rock, thinking that if only this were what he was thinking about. The boy was shocked. Hooray, it was water! He immediately undressed and leaped into it. Splashes soared in different directions. He began to clean his clothes, but then the voice laughed and said that it was cute and carefree, thereby scaring the child very much. The boy covered himself, and the voice said that there was nothing to see there, which seemed to offend him. The boy was sad, putting on a torn shirt. He thought that these were just words, and he should stay calm. The boy moved forward, thinking that this body is simply not grown, that's all, and the voice apologized and asked not to be upset. The guy gathered water and put it in a flask. He ate berries. He thought that the mountain was to the east, so he must be near the Alpha area. The child looked at the sky. The sun was already setting. He did not see the fog that the forest was known for. Barefoot, he walked forward, making his way through the forest. The boy thought that his fear of crossing the animal glades was reduced by the fact that, as it turned out, only small animals were present here. He looked ahead and was shocked that he had not seen a single mana beast since he entered, because this place is rich in mana. What a pity that he could not stay and absorb some of the mana, because he needed to hurry. He recalled his mother's eyes. He needed to return to his parents. His beloved mother was pregnant. The stress of his potential death could harm the child inside her. The boy thought he hoped that they were still alive. It was getting dark. The voice added that she was glad that he was able to get out here safe and sound. He looked at the rock, then looked up at the bird, and said that he was happy to meet her. The rock in front of him seemed to be talking. The voice said that it was not her. He needed to go into the crevice. The boy saw a glow and went there. It was dark inside the crevice. He swallowed loudly. The boy was serious. He was thinking about his parents and about the fact that he would soon return home. In the dark cave, he moved towards the light. A voice warned him to watch his step, but it was too late. The stones under the boy's feet began to crack, and he soared to the very bottom. He soared and soared. He soared for a long time. He soared for a very long time. Then he fell to the ground. He hit his cheek very hard. He stood up and held onto it as if he hadn't been hit enough before. He thought that a warning that he could fall 2 floors down would not have hurt him. The child sat up. He looked up and was very shocked. At that moment, a stone vanished from under his bottom. He fell again, turning back in horror. He wondered what it was. There was a huge stone creature, a stone woman with horns, looking at him. She said that they finally met. She stood up. Dust came out from under her feet. Her horns clung to the ceiling. With heavy steps forward, she rushed towards the boy. He was simply terrified. The lump said that bugs would fly into his mouth if he kept it open so wide. The child abruptly slammed his mouth shut. The creature narrowed her eyes. She leaned towards him and held out her hands. The guy took her claw. She said that she needed time to open the spatial rift. He was strong enough to take him home. She pointed to the strange plants and said that they were special and would not be able to feed them until then. Pups leaned down and thanked her. Then he turned around and began to inspect the plants, thinking that they looked normal. The berry objected, and he saw himself. He recalled his parents, how they ate fruit, and left to toss these sad memories out of his head. The guy began to shake it. The creature appeared behind him again. She sat on his knee and said that this berry tasted better, and you were frightened. He burst the fruit and stood all in the liquid. It was dark around. The child was eating a berry, and a large stone block was sitting nearby and doing the same. He looked at her and began to think. The guy dared to ask how he could address her. She answered that her name was Sylvia. He looked at her and asked if he could ask a couple more questions. In response, he heard permission, although perhaps she would not be able to answer all his questions. The guy raised his hand and began a talk with her. With his slowly fading fear from the look of the creature, he began to ask her all the questions that had been on his mind since he woke up from the fall. Where is he? Where is this place? Why was she here all alone? Where is she from? How did she get this wound? And why did she rescue him? She looked at him and answered that his first question is enough question. This place is an arrow zone that lies between the animal fields in the forest. She showed a map. No one knows about this place because she has guarded it from anyone who approaches, although such cases are very rare. She told that Arthur, the first one who entered there. The boy scratched the back of his head and said that she could call him by his short name. He looked away and explained that his family calls him that. It is an affectionate shortening of his name. And she leaned over and said that she will call him that from now on. While the boy looked at her, the stone woman continued to speak. Regarding his second question, she is here alone because she has no one else to be with. The woman looked up and added that she has many enemies who desperately want what she has. The boy was sad. She took hold of her wound, adding that in her last fight with the enemy, before she could escape, she was given this wound. The boy listened to her carefully. She continued to talk about why she rescued him. Then she stood up and looked at the baby, saying that maybe she was touched by his bravery, or maybe she just felt lonely. She couldn't choose between the two. The creature went to her throne, apologized, but it was already night, and she was worsening early. She should be in good condition when she worked on the spatial rift tomorrow. The guy looked at her and wished her good night sadly. He looked down. The fifth one felt sorry for her because she looked very lonely. She decided to add that she forgot something. She turned to him, said that her vision could not reach the place where they were going. Then she grinned and added that his family and friends were safe, in case he was not sure. The baby beamed with joy. He almost started to cry. Now he was certain that they were safe. After that, he could not hold back his tears, and he broke into a grin. Time passed. The boy played with his one. The woman watched and helped him pick berries and showed him her magic. They even slept together in an embrace for hours. They could talk about different things when they were not preparing the portal. Sylvia was in the lotus position and told the boy something. These hours flowed into days, these days of the week, while they spent every moment in each other's company. The boy thought about the fact that the woman never talked about her life. He gradually began to understand that this is a person, this mysterious creature. Arthur sat on top of a cliff and meditated. Energy gathered around him. He opened his eyes. At this moment, the creature was picking berries. She was a living example of the phrase, "Do not judge a book by its cover." Despite her look, she was kind, gentle, patient, and warm. She looked at him, approaching him with berries. The woman asked if the baby had had lunch. These fruits are especially sweet and rarely grow in other places. The child took the berry. The woman reminded him of his mother and that she was also gentle and kind. He thought and looked ahead. She scolded him harshly when he was wrong, clutching his head. The boy recalled something. He recalled that awful person, the time when he showed hostility towards them and did not deserve death, and worse, if any of them survived. The child was very mad. He frowned, his eyebrows were furrowed. He was going to track them down. At that moment, a huge hand approached him, and she gave him a good flick. The child soared to the side and fell on a stone. He got up, grabbed his head, and asked what it was. A huge boulder sat down next to him and said that perhaps he was not mistaken and that these robbers deserved death. She decided not to save the life of the magician with whom he fell for the same reason. In response, the boy asked why her but did not have time to finish. The woman was sad. She added that letting your heart be clouded by hatred and the moon would only hurt you. Instead, you should continue to go forward in the life of the city. The boy held his head and listened carefully, and she continued to speak and said that if he met a lot of lunch, do not let sorrow and anger eat his mind. Learn from others and look to the future with a grin. That's what he should do. Only then will he truly win. She lay down next to him and stroked his head. She regretted that she had snapped him too hard and asked if it hurt. Sylvia was sad. A lecture on morality in life by a figure who seemed to be the embodiment of evil strangely struck him, calling out to him several times. The guy suddenly came to his senses. The woman asked why he did not eat fruit. He scratched the back of his head and replied that he was fine. Then he began to eat fruit. The wound of the lump was oozing blood. It seemed to be getting worse. She covered it and told the child not to worry because it would worsen from time to time. The child continued to chew, and she said that she was also going to ask for something. The creature lowered her head and said that people usually wake up at the age of 12 or 13, so how did he form a core that could already use more effective skills than many full-fledged mages? The boy grinned and replied that his parents said he was a genius. Then the woman clung to him and said that maybe he could learn it. The boy asked again, learn what? She walked away from him. That's when she screamed very loudly and explained absorbing mana while moving and possibly during fight, if you're good enough. The boy was shocked. He didn't understand how she was going to do it. The creature grinned. She raised her hand. People have very linear thinking about mana. You just have to start with small, meaningless movements and move from there. The boy looked at his hands and didn't understand what to do. He clenched his fist, clenched it even harder, then looked up and said that it was easier said than done, to which he heard the answer that animals learn to do it naturally, but since humans usually wake up much later, their bodies are not capable of multitasking so much. As the boy looked at his hands, she added, considering that the latter fact did not apply to him. If he trained hard, he would succeed. The boy clenched his fists again, grinned, and said that he would do his best, to which the woman laughed and said that this was to be expected. While she was gathering energy for the portal, the boy was practicing hard. Well, he tripped and fell, and the woman laughed loudly at him. Together with his one, he continued to practicing this skill to the fullest meant being able to fight effectively, while keeping a steady internal flow of mana. Sweat was running down his cheeks, his hands were trembling. He swung his stick, swung it again, pointed it forward, then he looked at his hands, saw the energy, and thought that this could not be. The stone creature screamed and told him that everything worked out, but Sylvia was lying still. At that moment, she was bleeding. The guy was terrified. He ran up to the woman, and she was bleeding. The child ran as fast as he could and asked what happened. He turned around. At that moment, he was already standing in a pool of blood. His heels were dirty. Trying to turn the creature, he asked her to hold on. He gathered all his energy. He screamed very loudly, and he managed to turn her over. A loud bang was heard. The wound was bleeding. The guy looked at her with tears and asked why it was getting worse so quickly. The energy portal was getting bigger. Arthur looked at it and thought that it couldn't be. Now it dawned on him it was getting worse because she was increasing the portal. He recalled the wonderful moment when she fed him a berry, how they practiced together, how she laughed, how they talked, even how she scared him for the first time. The memories were fading. The child fell to his knees. He understood that while she was keeping the portal, she was getting worse. She was doing all this for him, his hands clenched into fists. The boy's teeth were raw from pain, tears were rolling down his cheeks. Then the creature stroked him. She said that everything was fine. The child grabbed her hand and continued to cry. He asked how everything could be good when, but he could not finish and cried very hard. She was dying because of him. Berries were glowing around. The boy cried longer than he could admit. The boy sat at the woman's feet. For the first time, he cried like the child he was outside. She asked if he had calmed down, but in response, she heard that he did not. The child continued to sob. The rock placed her hand to her chest and said that they did not have much time left together, and she wished that he did not blame himself for this. Wiping away his tears, the boy said that he couldn't help but blame himself because she was sacrificing herself so that he could meet his family. At that moment, the creature grinned. She said that he was doing her a favor, allowing her to leave this abandoned cave much faster. At that moment, the boy clenched his teeth and cried even harder. Her fingers began to turn into something similar to lava. She said that the name really does not suit this form. The change began. Large white wings appeared, white fur. The boy closed his eyes, the glow was so bright. And then a beautiful white dragon appeared in front of him. She looked at him with her incredibly beautiful purple eyes and said that now she looked more like Sylvia. The young man was shocked. He did not understand if she really was a dragon. The woman looked straight at him. She replied that she believed that all people called her a dragon, but they had little time for empty talk now that she was in this form. The beautiful dragon went towards the portal, adding that she had to use her original form to finish it, but now that the disguise was gone, they would be there soon. The boy asked who they were. At that moment, the portal shone brighter than before. The boy closed his eyes. The woman turned to him and told him to listen to her carefully. Covering him with her wing, she added that there were a few things she had to tell him before they parted. She handed him a colorful egg. The boy looked at it as if it were some kind of wonder, and thought that it was not heavy, but it felt like he could barely hold it. She grabbed her wing and also pulled a feather out of it. For a second, this feather was for the guy. She told him to wrap the egg in a feather to hide the aura. The boy did not understand what it was. At that moment, the dragon asked him to be patient with her a little longer, after which she hit him in the stomach with her nose with all her might. He looked at his hand. Some symbols began to appear on it. They were burned on his body with terrible pain. After a moment, it stopped. The guy was in great pain, and the dragon said that it would show itself when the time came. She looked at the boy. Her eyes began to dim. The guy asked if everything was okay, and with her last strength, she approached him, said that she would now open a portal. She did not have time to choose the exact place, but he should be somewhere near his parents. She had to rush. The guy asked if he really was leaving her just like that. Stones began to fall from the ceiling. Aurora rose. The boy looked up in fear. Well, the dragon covered him with her beautiful wings. Stones began to fall right on her. Someone from around the corner turned to her. He advised her to stop being stubborn and hand him over. A strange stone man appeared in front of them with horns like Sylvia before. He ordered to hand him over now, and for this, he would heal her wound. The boy looked ahead and thought that he looked like her previous form. It was approaching. They say that the woman gave them a lot of trouble after she hid here. Stones continued to fall from above. There was incredible energy around the dragon. She said that she needed to confess something to him, though she intended to extend the creation of the transportation spell in order to spend more time with him. The boy looked at her very sadly. Bleeding, she added that she would ask him to forgive her, but she had one more selfish request. The dragon looked at him and asked if he could call her grandma at least once. The boy grabbed her wing. The child clenched his teeth. He just asked her to leave with him. He begged her, saying that everything would be fine. They could leave together from there right now. The dragon's eyes filled with tears. She closed her eyes. A tear flowed. She said that she could not. Then, at that moment, tearing out her wing, She said goodbye to him, and at the same second, she threw him right into the portal. The young man screamed in tears, begged her to go with him. The last thing he saw was her sitting in front of the portal, and at the last second, he shouted to her that she was his grandma. The dragon cried. She closed her eyes and grinned, thanking him. She remained sitting. Somewhere in the distance lay his wand. The berries sparkled brighter than before.